Daniel Morgan had never commanded a major battle in his life. Now he faced Britain's most feared cavalry, outnumbered and cornered. His plan looked suicidal: retreat before the fighting even began. Yet within 1 hour, an empire's finest force would collapse completely. This is the trap that rewrote the rules of warfare forever. In January 1781, on a frozen cow pasture in South Carolina, an untested American militia stood against Banastre Tarleton, the most feared cavalry officer in the British Army. What unfolded became one of history's most studied tactical victories, a trap built from psychology, terrain, and timing. Before we reconstruct exactly how it worked, hit subscribe so you never miss the next investigation into history's hidden systems. Like this video if forgotten strategy fascinates you, and comment which battle you want uncovered next. I stand in a frozen pasture in January 1781, watching breath turn to fog above men who have already decided they might die here before noon. Behind me, no rivers, no ridgelines, no forest to vanish into. Daniel Morgan chose this exact ground, and every officer who studied it afterward asked the same question: why here, of all places? The answer isn't visible from where I'm standing. It's buried in a decision most commanders would never dare make. This militia had broken and run at Camden 5 months earlier. That collapse still lived in every soldier's memory, and Tarleton's cavalry knew it. So Morgan did something no rational strategist does. He removed the escape route. Behind his men sat the broad river, swollen and impassable, cutting off retreat entirely. What looked like carelessness was engineering. Morgan had built a battlefield where fear itself became a weapon he controlled, not one Tarleton could exploit. Using AI-assisted terrain reconstruction from historical surveys and period maps, we can now trace the exact slope Morgan selected, a gentle rise disguised as a disadvantage. That rise hid his third line from view. Tarleton's scouts saw militia and skirmishers. They never saw the Continental regulars waiting just beyond the crest. Every visible weakness was bait. Every hidden strength was timed to appear at the precise moment British confidence turned into overreach. Tarleton had never lost a major engagement. He was riding toward a formation built specifically to exploit that exact record. And he had no idea the trap had already closed around him before a single shot was fired. Every trap needs bait. And Morgan understood something most commanders refuse to admit. The weakest soldiers in his army would decide the entire battle. His militia had run before. Everyone knew it. The British knew it. The Continentals knew it. And worst of all, the militiamen themselves knew it. A lesser tactician would have hidden that weakness. Morgan did the opposite. He built his entire strategy around it. But there was one problem. Trust doesn't rebuild itself in a single night, and Morgan had less than 12 hours before Tarleton's forces arrived. So he walked from campfire to campfire, speaking to soldiers individually. No grand speech, no performance, just a simple, specific instruction repeated dozens of times. Fire 2 shots, just 2. Then fall back, not in panic, but on command, to a position already chosen for you. This wasn't inspiration. It was engineering disguised as encouragement. Morgan wasn't asking men to be brave. He was asking them to follow a sequence. What nobody realized was that this instruction solved 2 problems simultaneously. It gave frightened men permission to retreat without shame, while feeding Tarleton exactly the signal he was trained to exploit. British doctrine treated militia withdrawal as collapse. Tarleton had seen it before, and it had always meant the same thing: momentum, chaos, an opening to charge. Using AI-reconstructed troop positioning models based on period accounts, Historians can now trace how this single psychological calculation, not courage, not superior numbers, became the first gear in a machine built to consume Tarleton's confidence and turn his own doctrine into the mechanism of his defeat. Every battle you've ever studied in school hides a second battle underneath it. One fought in wagons, storehouses, and ledgers long before anyone fired a shot. Cowpens wasn't won by courage alone. It was won because one army understood supply and the other assumed superiority would compensate for exhaustion. Tarleton's force had marched through swampland for days, chasing Morgan across South Carolina without rest, without proper resupply, without knowing they were being led somewhere specific. This wasn't accidental fatigue. Morgan had studied Tarleton's pursuit patterns and recognized something most opponents missed. The British cavalry's greatest strength was also its structural weakness. Speed required momentum. Momentum required constant forward pressure, and constant forward pressure meant Tarleton's men had almost no time to eat, sleep, or reconnoiter properly. Using AI-assisted logistics modeling drawn from period supply records, we can reconstruct just how depleted Tarleton's column actually was by the morning of January 17th. His men had eaten little in over 24 hours. Their horses were spent. Their scouts, exhausted, delivered incomplete intelligence about the ground ahead. What nobody in the British column realized was that Morgan wasn't retreating from them by accident. He was retreating toward a location he had already scouted, measured, and prepared. This is the hidden mechanism behind nearly every stunning upset in military history. Not superior weapons, not superior numbers, but superior control over time, terrain, and information. Tarleton believed he was chasing a broken army toward its final collapse. In reality, he was marching his exhausted men directly into the one place Morgan had built specifically to receive them. And the trap required his exhaustion to work. Most armies fight with one plan. Morgan fought with three: stacked, sequenced, and deliberately designed to fail in a specific, controlled order. His first line held skirmishers, ordered to fire twice and withdraw. Their job wasn't to win. Their job was to bleed the enemy's certainty, one volley at a time. The second line held militia, the same men rebuilt overnight through trust, not bravado, positioned to deliver one final volley before retreating exactly as instructed. But there was one problem few outside the officer corps understood. A scripted retreat looks identical to a real collapse, and Tarleton had no way to tell the difference in real time. The third line changed everything. Continental regulars, hidden beyond the rise, hadn't fired a single shot. They were waiting for a moment Morgan had already calculated before the battle began. Using AI-modeled battlefield reconstructions based on troop reports and terrain data, we can now trace precisely when British momentum crossed from advantage into overextension. As militia fell back on cue, Tarleton's infantry surged forward, convinced they were witnessing the same collapse they'd seen at Camden months earlier. What nobody in the British ranks realized was that this apparent victory was pulling them directly into range of soldiers they hadn't even seen yet. Then everything changed. William Washington's cavalry, held in reserve behind the hill, prepared to strike the exact moment British formation broke into pursuit rather than order. Tarleton believed he was one charge away from crushing the American line completely. Instead, his advancing infantry was walking directly into a kill zone built from three separate lies, each one designed to collapse at precisely the wrong moment for the men wearing red coats. In under 1 hour, one of the most feared units in the British Army stopped existing as a fighting force. And almost no one who witnessed it fully understood why until much later. William Washington's cavalry struck from behind the rise at the precise moment British infantry broke formation to chase what they believed was a retreating militia. But there was one problem Tarleton never accounted for. His men weren't chasing chaos. They were charging into a formation still holding its shape, waiting exactly where Morgan had calculated they would arrive. The Continental regulars, silent until this moment, delivered a volley from point-blank range. What followed wasn't a battle anymore. It was a system completing its function. Using AI reconstructed movement modeling based on eyewitness accounts, we can trace how British lines folded inward within minutes, unable to reform once their forward momentum collided with disciplined fire. Tarleton's cavalry reserve, the unit meant to exploit any American weakness, hesitated at the critical second, a hesitation Morgan's entire design had anticipated. That single hesitation was the last mechanism in the trap. Without cavalry support, British infantry had no path forward and no organized way to retreat. What nobody in the British command structure realized was that they hadn't been defeated by superior force. They had been defeated by superior sequencing. Every decision made in the correct order, at the correct moment. In under an hour, Tarleton lost nearly his entire command. Morgan, the untested general, had done what career officers considered impossible against Britain's most feared tactician. This wasn't a story about courage overcoming odds. It was a story about a hidden system, psychological, logistical, and geographic, engineered so precisely that defeat became mathematically inevitable before the first shot was ever fired. What happened at Cowpens wasn't a triumph of muskets or courage. It was a triumph of design, where terrain, psychology, and timing operated together as a single, deliberate machine. Morgan's victory rewired American momentum in the Southern campaign, forcing Cornwallis into a pursuit that would eventually exhaust his army entirely, paving the road toward Yorktown and the collapse of British authority in the colonies. The lesson endures far beyond 1781. The deadliest trap isn't built from weapons. It's built from understanding your enemy's certainty and turning that certainty into the very mechanism of his defeat.